medical practices or the poor conditions in which she worked and the financial records that were not always in line or things like that and were questionable in some ways. And there was a lively debate always around. Michael Jordan came up. Okay, I don't know much about Michael Jordan. In fact, I know more about Michael Jordan from Space Jam than I do about basketball. But came up as Michael Jordan not being a really pleasant or nice person. But we know him as kind of a poster child for something that kids can aspire to be. But it would seem, in retrospect, by those who know Michael Jordan, that the only thing that mattered in his life was basketball and winning. That was the only thing he knew, and the only time he felt like he was completely himself was when he was doing that. It wasn't people, it wasn't relationships, it was the sport of basketball that defines him. And his treatment of others reflected that, and he was particularly harsh on his teammates. And some people would say he was just demanding excellence of others because he demanded it of himself, perhaps. But there are plenty of other people who would consider his behavior ungracious and possibly abusive of the other players. And at the end of the day, what is he? A flawed human being, acting on his own deeply held convictions. Perhaps misguided, but still acting on his own convictions. Sometimes we see people in an unrealistic way. Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa. Sometimes we insist on seeing ourselves a certain way. Michael Jordan could not see himself beyond the sport of basketball and how it defined him. Some people can't stand to see themselves as flawed in any way. Some people have to win no matter what. Winning is everything. And some of those people, for them, the ends always justify the means. And we see that play out all the time in politics, where winning matters more than doing the right thing. And lest we forget, in the early 80s, there was an active takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention. Whether or not it was supported or not, what side of the theological spectrum you're on, the fact of the matter was that someone decided on a direction that it needed to go and actively manipulated the existing system to move it in that direction. Planned it, executed it, because the end justifies the means. Unless you think that's so far away, if you look at, and this is one of the reasons why we do actively look at the bylaws and are looking at revising them now, because if you look at most of the bylaws for any church, someone with an active agenda without concern for people and their dignity and respect can manipulate a system and move it in a certain way. For some people, all that matters is winning. And when our vision of what we want to become is so important that we're willing to do whatever it takes to achieve it, that's when we forget. We are flawed human beings. We become blind to those things that make us human. And that's what made me think of the phrase feet of clay, because it reminds us that we're human. We all have feet of clay. And it comes from this passage that Felice read in Daniel. Here you have King Nebuchadnezzar, who was demanding and expecting to be obeyed. He knew who he was and what his role was, and nobody messed with that. Earlier in the chapter, she didn't read, he confronted the seers and wise men of his court and said, if you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut to pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. And they responded, nobody can reveal it except the gods, and the gods don't live among the humans. And this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men in Babylon. That's somebody